World War II is a terrible event, the echoes of which are still felt all over the world. And the idea of going back in time and massacring Hitler is demonstrated even by blockbusters. But what if it had happened? What would be the world without the main troublemaker of the last century? This we will show you now, and you join us in the comments with your versions. Let's start with the fact that Hitler's entry into politics is pure chance, and it's not even about the fact that he studied diligently in elementary school, sang in the choir and was a priest's assistant, and not about the fact that he wrote poetry, composed libretti for a Wagner opera and survived a severe lung disease in his youth. Although any of these factors was enough to make the life of the future tyrant turned in another direction or interrupted altogether, the speech is not about them. First of all, talk about the river Ina, on which in 1884, 5-year-old Adolf fell into the icy water. He was miraculously saved by a passing boy who had no idea what it would lead to, and then there was the First World War. Hitler went through it in its entirety. In 1915 he was wounded by a grenade, and in 1918 he lost his eyesight after gas poisoning, and that's not all. Henry Tandy, a British soldier, was going to kill Hitler on the battlefield but changed his mind at the last moment when he saw he was wounded. Then there was a suicide attempt, a car accident, an assassination attempt, and even a trial, following which Hitler was miraculously not sentenced to death, and the tyrant's rise to power was accompanied by a million accidents. Even Stalin, who allegedly did not allow the communists to support Hitler's rivals to win, is blamed for it. Scientists compare the likelihood of Adolf's rise to power to the emergence of life on Earth. Too many coincidences led to it. But let's say at one stage Hitler disappeared. For example, he did get mobbed by a crowd after a speech in Munich. To understand what would have happened to the world, first of all, it is worth looking at Germany in the late 20s and early 30s of the last century, and we will see a power with huge ambitions humiliated by the defeat in the First World War. The most offensive detail is the transfer of lands with native Germans to Czechoslovakia. It is important to realize that all inhabitants of both Germany and Austria, regardless of race or gender, felt aggrieved. It was not only Germans who rebelled, but also Slavs and even Jews who were full citizens. The second factor was the Industrial Revolution. Defeat in World War I set the Germans back, but Hitler was not particularly involved in the economic miracle. Its foundations were laid in the 1920s. Already in 1927, Germany produced 22% more output than in 1913. This was equally aided by everyone: the Americans with their loans, the USSR with its recognition, and Europe with its cooperation. Hitler did not gain real power until 1933, and at that point Germany was far from weak. But in our history there is no Hitler. Who is? It doesn't really matter. It is certain that the Nazis would not have gotten such power. Fascism and Nazism are far from being German inventions. The roots of the movements go back to the First World War and an angry military. It seemed to everyone that they shed blood on the battlefields for nothing, and in one form or another Nazism spread throughout Europe. The same Mussolini, who shared Hitler's views, ruled in Italy since 1922. In one form or another, nationalists and fascists were everywhere. In England and France and even in the USSR, but in the vast majority of countries they failed to climb to the top of power, and without the charismatic Hitler it would have happened in Germany. Adolf's personality is contradictory, but one thing no one can argue with is that he was an excellent orator. So, in the early 30s the Nazis would definitely not have been in power. But it's not certain that this would have cancelled the war. First of all, as we've already said, the Germans felt humiliated. At the same time, the economy was growing, and any ruler or party in power would in any case aim to return the native German lands, and here we will remember the most horrible crime in the history of mankind: the Holocaust. It is rumored that Hitler suspected a Jewish doctor of poisoning his mother. Either way, he was the man behind the most insane genocide in history. None of his rivals or potential successors wanted such a thing. So what does this mean for our alternate branch of history? Science. Because in Germany in the early 30s, Jews were the driving force behind physics and other important fields. All scientists of our time declare with one voice that Germans were the first scientific power in the world at that time. We hope it is no secret that the main link in the creation of the atomic bomb and space rockets in the USSR, and especially in the US, were German migrant refugees. Edward Teller, the creator of the hydrogen bomb, was a Jew who escaped to the US in 1935. Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, other refugees, together with Teller, wrote a letter to Roosevelt about the need for nuclear weapons. And about Einstein, for whose head was assigned 50,000 marks, and achievements were attributed to Aryan scientists, we do not speak at all. Albert was a patriot and loved Germany. Open any list of inventors of atomic bombs and rockets. There will be an overwhelming majority of German refugee scientists. Now imagine that none of them left their homeland and worked for the good of Germany. The Manhattan Project, which led to the atomic bomb in the US, would have been realized in Germany 10 years earlier. Industrial progress continued even in spite of Hitler's racial cleansing, and without it the results would have been many times higher. Even with the escaped mines, there were still fears that the Nazis would have the atomic bomb before the end of the war. Without Hitler, it would have appeared in the 30s, and would anyone have turned their tongue to say something against the Germans, who would have politely asked to revise the results of the First World War and return them the land? For 1,000 times we repeat, it was the wish of all Germans who were offended by the fate, not only Hitler. He already did it in 1938, and it is doubtful that any of his successors would not have tried to achieve the same, peacefully. At this point, it is also important to assess the geopolitical situation in the world. For the same British and Americans, Stalin was no better than Hitler, and if the latter were eliminated, the axis of claims would only be the USSR. What's more, the decision to enter World War II and declare war on Hitler was not very popular in the US. Kill Adolf and replace him with a ruler who doesn't racially cleanses and doesn't want a world empire, and the conclusion is obvious. We do not make it an absolute, because politics is politics, and a strong Germany would also cause claims from the world community. And in this light, the theories proposed by Stephen Fry look realistic. In his 1996 novel, he concluded that things could have been worse if instead of the impulsive racist Hitler, someone cold-blooded and rational had been in power. The consequences could have been horrific. We don't really subscribe to this theory, because it is not a fact that the hypothetical successor would have wanted war. But the trouble is that Hitler was not the only one who wanted war in general. Japan, the USSR, Britain and the USA were also warming up for the meat grinder in the late 30s. The role of Hitler as the instigator of the worst massacre in history is key, but it is not personalities that make history. The situation in the world gives birth to personalities, and a lot of documents and investigations about the fact that the USSR wanted to attack Germany, and Britain did not know until the last moment who to fight with. This is an example. The only thing that can be said for sure is that without Holocaust and genocide of their own population, Germans approached the conflict much stronger, and the conditions at the end of the First World War did not suit not only them. Sooner or later, the powers that be would have had to go to war anyway. What such a war would have been like is a matter of speculation. With a certain degree of certainty, we can only say that the losses in it would most likely have been less, because as we have already mentioned, nuclear weapons would have appeared in Germany much earlier, and its potential rivals may have had no desire to fight much earlier. Everything else is just speculation, as well as blaming all the sins on Hitler alone. Look at the world around you now. Have presidents stopped swapping clubs and making wars in which ordinary working people die? No, and until people realize that it is pointless to barbecue each other for the sake of imaginary factors, racial, territorial and other superiorities, the world will not get better. There is no telling how much humanity needs lessons like Hitler's to change. See you again, friends. Thanks for watching.